As a writing teacher, I often read student essays about their most valued beliefs. And a common belief that I often read about is that you gotta live life with no regrets. But actually, I'm a big believer in regret. When I think about regret, I think of myself when I was about their age. I was 22 years old. I had just graduated college, and I moved to Nashville to join an AmeriCorps program that worked with senior citizens. Yes. Well, one particular day, a colleague of mine had asked me to cover an exercise class for him that he was teaching to a bunch of senior citizens at this church in East Nashville. So I showed up, and I walked into the church basement, and I was met with a dozen old, wrinkled, black faces. Now, since I had moved to the South, I had started to notice a few things about race that were becoming more clear to me. One thing that I noticed was that white people and black people seemed to live in somewhat mutual distrust of one another. It's kind of the idea of you got yours, I got mine. In fact, on Martin Luther King Jr. Day, our AmeriCorps group went and volunteered at the National Civil Rights Museum in Memphis. And I could not help but notice that of the throngs of people who came to pay their respects, there were virtually no white people. So when I walked into this church, the spiritual home of survivors of the civil rights movement, I knew that how they would probably view me. I mean, I felt like I was walking there like a little twit with this big blonde hair, and my skin felt blazingly, obnoxiously white, like it had never felt in my entire life. It felt like stadium lights had just come on when I walked in the room. So this one woman named Gladys came up to me, and she introduced me to the group. And we sat in chairs that were in a circle, and I explained that we were going to toss this beach ball around to work on our reflexes. So I threw the beach ball across the circle to this guy named Frank, and I threw it way harder than I intended to, probably because I was feeling a little awkward. And the ball ricocheted off of Frank's paunch and smacked Gladys in the face. And before I could even feel mortification, the group erupted. They loved it. It was like the best thing they'd ever seen. And Frank looked at Gladys, and he pointed a finger at me and said, "That was her." And Gladys jumped to my defense, and she said, "Well, maybe if your gut were a little smaller than that ball, Frank." And the whole hour went on like that. We were all ragging on each other. I was like one of the gang all of a sudden, and laughter, and it was amazing. I felt so comfortable. And after the class ended, they joined hands to say a prayer, and so I instinctively stepped back to give them some privacy, but Gladys took my hand, and the circle closed. And Frank led the prayer, and he said, "And God, thank you for sending Katie to help keep us strong and healthy. Please look over her, Lord, and bless her as she has blessed us. Amen." And then a chorus of amens after that. I had never felt such unwarranted love from total strangers before in my life. And when they asked me if I would like to come to their service that Wednesday, I said, absolutely. And I shook each of their hands one by one. I was like, "See you there, Frank. Later, Gladys. Wednesday, 11 a.m. Look for me." On Wednesday, I was sitting in the AmeriCorps office looking at the clock. It was about time to go, and I knew that I would be walking into that church as probably the only white person in a black congregation. And I looked down, and I let 11 o'clock come and pass. As a writing teacher, I find that my students often have difficulty with the grammatical rule to stay in one tense. They often take it incredibly literally and will write an entire essay just in the past tense or just in the present tense. But as I try to explain to them, the past is always a part of the present. I've continued to think about race since my days in Nashville, and recently a student of mine came up after class and invited me to go to a campus dialogue on race in the classroom. So I was eager to go, and at the forum, students talked very candidly about their experience being the only black kid in the classroom, and they talked about feeling like they had to work twice as hard as everyone else and feeling like they were always on a stage. And At one point, the moderator asked if which faculty we had in the room, and so I raised my hand along with all the other faculty members, and then the students were kind of scanning around the room, and so I looked too, and I noticed that mine was the only hand in the air out of a college of 150 teachers. Now, I'm human, so I know the temptation of feeling proud of myself for doing the right thing, but that's the value of regret, because that has always stuck with me. I will never know what those amazing, loving elders thought about my absence that day in Nashville. But it is because of them that my students now could turn around and see that their teacher had showed up and was sitting there, present. Thank you.